Great. Okay. All right. Whoever comes in can join us when they're whenever they arrive. Welcome everybody to session 2 of our Short Sharp Stories webinars, mini workshops. As we mentioned, today is going to basically revolve around answering your questions about the competition, but also about writing in general. And what we thought we would do as well, because it worked so well last time, is to spend the second hour actually doing another one of our little kind of mini workshops. And we can see how that goes and try and do a little bit of sharing again, possibly 3 or 4 people can share. I think, people are always very amazed at the kind of material that that can be written in a short space of time. And I think particularly for writers who perhaps haven't used this process before, or who are our newer writers who want to have a little bit more experience with the writing process, it's helpful to them. So welcome to new writers, welcome to those we know, and to our seasoned writers who are here as well. So Karina and I are your hosts. I'm Joanne Hitchens. I'm the founder of Short Sharp Stories, and Karina this year is going to be editing our volume called Fluid, The Freedom to Be, and she's the co-host of today's webinar. So welcome, Karina, and thank you so much to All About Writing as well, who are doing all the background, the bits and pieces, the technical stuff that I have no idea at all about. So we're really, really pleased to have Emma here with us. And thanks again to All About Writing. And Karina's going to kick off just basically with a short, sharp recap of what we did the last time. And then after that, we'll move towards the stories, not the stories, the questions. I'm also going to read something very short before we get going with the questions. Okay, Karina.
Yeah, hello everyone. Hello from Richmond, where we are now celebrating the 15th Boek Bedonnerd, a literary festival, and now it's called Maribaland World Literary Festival at Boek Bedonnerd. The last 2 days have been really exciting, and if you are interested, it's continuing until Saturday, and one can join via Zoom. So please do. There has been some really exciting stuff happening here, including John Banville talking to us at the opening and saying something really, really beautiful. He said whenever he enters a bookshop, he knows he's not supposed to buy any more books because he's got plenty. And he said, but they all just say, hold me, just hold me. And then, of course, he can't resist. Yeah, so yeah, hello from Richmond, the book town of Richmond, very inspiring in its own way. Those of you who joined us last session will recall that it was mainly technicalities. So it was like, getting the scaffolding of what one needs in order to understand the technical side of story writing. But the one thing that I would like to emphasize, I'm not going to summarize. If anybody needs to go back, please watch the video or just write to us, and I'm very happy to send some of my notes. But I think the most important thing to know about all those sometimes boring and technical things is that, those rules are there to break them. And this is, I think, where the creativity comes in. If you know what you are doing and you can start experimenting with it, it's so exciting. And it's also, it's not there to restrict one, it's there to free one to do, really freedom to be. So maybe even transporting the idea of fluidity into writing, that those transgressions that we can do as writers, that's the exciting stuff, that's the creative stuff. And I would also like to mention something that I know that Joanne is going to read a passage to us from Sindiwe Magona. And I remember Sindiwe, who is one of our most treasured storytellers in the country, a true living legend. And somebody who has done so much for literature and storytelling in South Africa that, you know, we can never, ever thank her enough for what she's doing. And I remember being with her in Lesotho, of all places. And we were also part of a festival where I also ran a short story workshop. And all kinds of people from Lesotho, young writers, emerging writers, also experienced writers, joined us for the workshop. And she walked in as well. And I said, but Sindiwe, you know everything about storytelling. And she said, you know what? I love workshops and I love participating. And they also, they also contribute to her own writing. And she said it with such wonderful joy and humility. And my admiration for her grew even more in that moment. So I think, you know, we don't have all the wisdom in the world. We don't know everything. We are here as much to to learn as to share what experience we've got. So yeah, let's make this as interactive as possible. And I look forward to what will happen next, because I think towards the end of last session, there was some really wonderful, exciting stuff coming out. So thank you so much for contributing and for sharing this space with us.
Great, thanks, Karina. I think that really sums it up. And because it is on record in the video, I don't think we need to actually summarize what happened in our last session. But yeah, just to recap, we did talk about the technicalities, and we talked about some quite sophisticated concepts like the reliable versus the unreliable narrator. And we also spoke about the nuts and bolts of writing, the show, don't tell, how to use dialogue, how to use detail. So I think there was quite a range of technical stuff that came up. So if you need to recap for yourselves, please go and watch that video. Yeah, thanks for all those lovely words about Sindiwe, and she is indeed a national treasure. And she wrote the foreword for Incredible Journey. Oops, yeah, it's, yeah, can you see the title? I mean, when I see it, it's back to front. I don't know what you see. Is it also back to front?
No, it's perfect.
Okay, fine. Okay. Do you see, I'm a technical idiot, but anyway. Yeah, and I was just rereading a couple of the forewords the other day, and this passage struck me, particularly with our theme, fluid, the freedom to be. She wrote, a journey does not only refer to the physical act of going from point of departure to destination, but could indicate the passage of time, or indeed passage from one stage to another. South Africa, the country and its people, are on such a journey. The whole wide world held its breath as the country transformed from exclusive apartheid to inclusive democracy. That is our political journey, still in process, albeit in shaky gait all too often, which is especially true, I think, nowadays. At a recent conference, Nigerian writer Ben Okri said, every nation needs its awkward truth tellers. I believe that no nation needs this more than South Africa does. And she talks a little bit about Incredible Journey and how we've been, how the book shows where we've been and where we're going. And then she says, it shows us much, much more, because ours is a journey still in its infancy. Believe it or not, we are still at a stage where we must discover who we are. We still need to share what makes us uniquely South African. To achieve this, not only must we open up and reveal ourselves, but we must look and listen. We must learn who and what the person we have thought of as the other actually is, and how like us that person may be, or indeed how different. We are still on the journey, she writes, so to speak, of self-revelation towards self-discovery. the reason I loved that passage is because I think many years, a number of years, how many years, I think that was produced in 2016. So we're at least 5 or 6 years beyond Incredible Journey. But we continue to develop as a nation. We continue to find out who we are. And in a sense, fluid, the freedom to be, takes us into uncharted territory. It takes us into areas where we really can address who we are on a personal level, as well as on a national level and on a creative, imaginative level. I think it allows us so many opportunities to really look at what freedom is and what fluidity is, whether it's crossing borders or whether it's has to do with sexual gender issues. There are so many aspects of freedom to explore. And that's why I thought that small section is really pertinent to the fact that we are still on this journey of discovering who we are. So just to bear that in mind when we get to the stories. But now what we're going to do is address the questions that have come in. And Karina, you're going to start off. And the way we're going to do this is Karina and I will each take a turn to answer a question that has been sent in. And then, you know, we'll chip in to each other's responses as well. So Karina, do you want to start us off with Melissa's questions? She sent in 2 questions.
So the first one is, how do you know when to keep your story a short story and when to keep writing and make it something longer? And the second question is related, so I'm going to read it out as well. Can something originally published as a short story then later become a full-length novel or something like that without the short story publication disqualifying it from future consideration? So I think, you know, how do you know when to keep your story a short story and when to keep writing and make it something longer is one that I asked Joanne whether I could take it first, because it's something that I will never forget when writing myself. I started off with an image that I had of, I saw a wonderful statue in a park in Paris. And the statue intrigued me on many levels. And then a few days later, an image came to my mind where there were 2 people looking at that statue, and there was tension between them. And they were both seeing the statue in completely different ways. And I thought, oh, there is a story in this. So I started writing a short story about that image that came to me. And then I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then suddenly the short story was 7,000 words long. And I felt this is no longer a short story. This is going to be something longer. And that is what became my first published novel. So from that, my own experience, what I can say is that I always tell writers that listen to when that kind of creative intuition keeps bothering you. You know, you have some kind of an idea, you have an image, you have a prompt, there is a competition that you enter, you are writing to a specific theme, whatever it is that sparks the idea in the first place. And you think that you are writing a short story, or the other way around. I can imagine that you might think that you want to write a novel, and after 5,500 words, you think, but you know, it's complete in itself. So I always say, listen to that creative intuition where you're inside, you feel, no, this is complete. Nothing is bothering you anymore. Nothing is saying, but hang on, you haven't explored this, and this is still not the way it should be. Or maybe this character is much larger than you in the beginning imagined. Or maybe the theme needs to be explored on a different level. And then, so Obviously, for very practical reasons, when you want to enter a short story competition or a prize that says, you know, the limit is, I don't know, 3,000 words or 5,000 words or 10,000 words, you will have to write towards that brief. But if there are no constraints like that, then just listen to also from within yourself, but also from within the story. When does it feel right? And something that I do notice occasionally when writers write for competitions and there is a specific word count, that they then try to, you know, the story is complete at 2,000 words, but then you start stretching. And so you add unnecessary descriptions or unnecessary lines to dialogue, or introduce some kind of a frame to the story. And I think that when you do it and the story doesn't demand it, you are just filling in words, your reader will feel that. I see it when I read stories like that, where I can see this is just padding, you know, it's not what the story demanded. So I think, yeah, you need to be guided by your own intuition and from within the story, what the story demands. And if a story is perfect under the word count that you wanted to achieve, maybe it's not the right one to enter for a specific competition. Maybe there is another one that will be able to, you know, fit both what you wanted to achieve and the word count. And then with the second part of the question, I can also tell you a related story from my own experience as a reader for competitions and then as a publisher. I had the huge honor to co-publish Karen Jennings's An Island. And that novel started off as a short story that she entered into the competition, the other one that I spoke about briefly last week. So she entered it into Short Story Day Africa. And it made the anthology. And when you read that story, it is the seed for the novel. So that short story became eventually the novel, and neither the one or the other one disqualified the other. So I think that there is absolutely no problem. Sometimes, you know, something will still niggle inside and want to be written into a larger narrative. And I don't think that I'm trying to look up. So what was the formulation? How would it disqualify it from future consideration? I don't think that there is anything that could disqualify it. What could become problematic is the other way around. If you publish a novel and then you want to extract a story out of it somehow, that I can imagine could be problematic. So okay. Yes, Joanne?
Yeah, thanks, Karina. No, I just wanted to echo that as well. And to say that we at Short.Sharp Stories, we don't own your story. So if you send in a story to us, you retain copyright. We use your story for the collection, and we try and place some stories in magazines, or we might use snippets of the stories to publicize the anthology, but the story remains yours to use in whatever way you want to at a later stage. So yes, often a short story can become a novel or a larger work or a play. So yeah, it really, I think, depends on the short story itself. And sometimes we, you know, the instinct is to start a short story. We have a great idea and we can only write a paragraph. It seems that that short story just doesn't want to go beyond that. And what I would suggest to people is that if that happens to you, just have a file called first paragraphs or first lines, because sometimes one will go back to a file like that a number of years later, and you might think to yourself, well, that was a great idea. I'm going to actually develop that now because I've learned more about the subject matter, or the character has grown on me. So nothing is ever wasted. And yeah, I mean, I think too that I hear what you're saying about padding, Karina, but sometimes the way some people work, and I think I tend to work this way, so with the short stories, is that I will rather write a shorter draft, let's say 2,000 words, simply because I need to get a sense of the coherence of the story. I want to try and understand how the story is going to fit together as a whole. And once I know that, then it seems almost easier to go into the story and to deepen the story, to either deepen the characters or write more about the setting or create some dialogue where I have an instinct that it might be useful. So in that sense, what I do is I will then probably create a story of 3,000 or 4,000 words. And then one goes back to paring it down again and looking for the superfluous, for the padding, as you say. So there are many ways to work at the short story. But also just to recognize, am I putting in useless information or information that isn't pertinent to the short story? And that's going to come up in some of the later questions. So let's go on to Tosca. Tosca said, do you accept stories that are leaning towards the erotic, not pornography, but not tame, bedroom door open? Some of you may know that we published a collection called Adults Only, which had a pair of incredibly voluptuous lips on the cover. And though that collection was made up of 20 stories of erotica, stories of love, sex, and sensuality, and some of them were very erotic and very sexy. And the stories went from a gay marriage to a woman who was whipped lightly on her bottom. I think it was called The Cat's Tail by Christine Coates. So we welcome anything that is out of the ordinary. And if you're leaning towards the erotic, why not? I think the word fluidity in itself conjures up a lot of sexual images or images of sensuality. And our concern might be that all the stories are going to be about sex and sensuality. So we hope that people are going to come up with other interpretations. But certainly we are looking for the surprising, for the erotic, for stories that really push those boundaries. Because if I think back to what Sindiwe Magona was saying, is that we're still learning about who we are. And that goes for our personal lives as well, for our love lives, for our gender, for how we live in marriage or out of marriage, open relationships. The list goes on and on. So of course there is space for that. And one person's pornography might be very tame if a different kind of reader reads it. So I think, again, go with your gut. You don't want to write stories that are overtly pornographic in the sense that they don't add, or the pornographic scenes, the sex scenes don't add to the story. But if those scenes are necessary, then please go ahead. We are not squeamish about that at all. And in fact, we encourage you to extend yourselves. The second question is from Tosca: is a non-linear story more effective or enticing than a linear story? It all really depends on how the story is told. And that's where we come back to those basic elements of style. If you know your character, if you allow your character to drive your story, if you've created a character that's more than simply a two-dimensional cardboard cutout, then your story will be authentic, whether it's linear or non-linear. So if you would like to be more experimental, we encourage that as well. And, you'll get a gut sense of whether it's working or not. If I have two characters, the third question starts, that are driving from point A to point B in a car, the story is driven more by the conversation than events. Is that acceptable? Yes, of course. You know, again, as Karina was saying, there are no hard and fast rules. We spoke last week, you know, of the elements of style, because I think one has to have a sense of what makes up a story and of all the different elements one can bring in order to tell that story or to show that story. But if you decide that you are going to build a story completely in dialogue, that's completely acceptable, as long as it works. So yeah, that is the big question. What works and what doesn't work? The more one writes, the more one has a sense of, yes, I feel it in my gut. I'm excited by this writing. I'm excited by the conversation. And there is a question a little bit later about dialogue. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. But Karina, would you like to add in, the pornography versus, something that's more tame?
I think that well, both of us are not prudish, so we are very open to exploring sexuality and eroticism in stories. The only thing where I personally would one doesn't want to censor anything, but as a reader, I definitely do not want to read about gratuitous violence, especially not against women and children, but against anybody. And I've encountered those stories before where, you know, my sense of eroticism is definitely not everybody's and the other way around. And I have absolutely nothing against stories about BDSM or any kind of explorations of sexuality. But the gratuitous violence or rape are areas where I would tread very, very, very carefully in storytelling, especially in a country like ours. Yeah.
And gratuitous violence, do you feel that that is violence that is superfluous to the story? Because in some cases, it is necessary to bring up violence. It is necessary to show violence. I don't have any examples at my fingertips, but because our country is violent, but if it fits in with the theme of fluid in some way, and it makes sense and it's authentic, then I would say trust your gut as a writer, write it and see what happens for you. See if you feel it's authentic or if it feels completely over the top and gratuitous in the sense that it really doesn't fulfill a place in the story. And the non-linear and linear, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the only thing that I can add is that sometimes one wants to kind of create suspense by first introducing you to something that will actually happen towards the end of the story or in the middle of the story, and you start hinting at it, and that creates a wonderful. So if you subvert the linear storytelling and you have some kind of foreshadowing, of course that makes the reader more eager to engage, because we are curious creatures by nature and we want to know what happens and why that particular thing. Like, I don't know whether you will remember in that example that I read out from Damon Galgut 2 weeks ago, where there is a mention of that there was an argument. And my curiosity goes immediately, it's just mentioned, but what was the argument about? So I want to read on to find out about that. But sometimes it doesn't work when you postpone that. There's just so much that a reader can hold on to in their mind and will be curious about. So, if you just hint and hint and hint and hint and hint and subvert the linear storytelling, eventually the reader will go like, oh, you lost me. So there is a danger of overdoing it. But it's a wonderful technique of, hooking one's curiosity.
Yeah, and I think, with any short story, one has to work towards point A to some kind of resolution. So, and the problem with this, not the problem, well, I suppose it is in a sense a problem. You're not writing a novel, so you can't flash back for pages and pages because there just isn't the time for that. So you've got to be very aware of keeping the story moving forward and incorporating perhaps flashbacks or whatever device you want to in order to show more of the character or more of the history or the setting. So again, just be aware of that, and be aware of, in whatever way you are telling your story, you are working towards some kind of conclusion. The next question, and then I think you can add, Karina, any ideas that you've got around dialogue. But Marie asked, are there general guidelines for A, length of dialogue in a particular interaction scene, or B, proportion of dialogue in a story as a whole? So there are no rules about this. And I'm echoing what I've just said, which is basically that some stories can be told completely as dialogue or as a monologue from the perspective of the I character. There's no need to use dialogue at all in your story if it doesn't suit the story. Your story might simply be, going back to your question, Tosca, one character in a car who is driving, and something happens to that character, either in his mind or on the road or in his own head. So yeah, dialogue is not absolutely essential. The one rule I would say is that dialogue is not speech. In other words, there is an art to writing dialogue to make it riveting. Dialogue needs to be refined. For example, you can't write, the way people talk in everyday language would be, I'd ask Karina, hi, how are you? You'd say, oh, I'm fine, how are you? And there'd be a whole lot of probably meaningless chit chat before we actually got to the point of what we wanted to say. So dialogue needs to be refined. For example, a character could say, hi, how are you? And the response could be, he asked me if I was fine. I've never felt worse in my life. Or he asked me if I was fine. I answered, there's a war on and I'm a refugee, so no, I'm not fine. There's no kind of preamble. There's no 3 pages building up to the actual sense of what this conversation is all about. So in other words, a lot of everyday speech can be left out of dialogue. So just be aware of that. Karina, would you like to add something?
Just something that I had to look up now quickly, because I remembered it from my university days. I wrote my MA on a wonderful British writer from the 30s, 40s, who then completely was forgotten by the time he passed away in I think in 77, Henry Green. And one of his I didn't write about that particular novel, I wrote about his wartime novels, but one of his most fascinating, technically fascinating novels is one called Doting. And it's really, the entire novel is pure dialogue. And he manages to bring all the other elements of storytelling into dialogues. And it's I'm not sure how easily available it is. But if you ever want to see a masterclass of what dialogue can do in a story, I would recommend that. It's an incredible thing to read, just to see what dialogue is capable of.
And remember as well that dialogue can be used to relay information, can be used to relay emotion. It depends how your character says something. So your character can say, I've had a bad day, or your character can scream, I've had a shit day, leave me alone. So, and then one needn't add the attribution, he said, in an angry tone, because it comes out that this person was angry. So just remember that as well. No, the words that you're going to use in dialogue are also going to show who your character is, what they've been through. And sometimes characters just need to tell each other information. Yes, if you want to find the ghost house, turn left on that corner. The next line could be, problem, I turned right. Now I'm lost. Now what am I going to do? So you can use it as a device and as a special effect in a sense. Okay, Karina, would you like to tackle the next one, which I think is also from Marie?
Yes. So the
Okay.
question is, how permissible or effective is it to use a character's thoughts as a means of bringing in backstory? This is a case of tell, not show, but how could backstory be shown rather than told? So I think, once again, it's a matter of balance. Of course, it's a wonderful technique, so please, by any means, use it. But it will also depend on which perspective you are using. So if you are writing as an omniscient narrator, then of course you can go into the thoughts of characters anytime, in and out, as you wish. If you're writing in the first the third person and it's limited, then you will not be able to access those thoughts as a narrator, or not every characters. And then I would always look into that. Don't use it as an easy way out. It can become overwhelming if somebody uses it all the time, and you will have in the story, and then she thought this, and this reminded her of the past. So it can become quite clumsy. But if it reveals something about the plot or the character or the setting, where a memory comes in, and it's vital to what you are trying to tell in the present, then it's immensely effective. And it can also transpire in dialogue. It doesn't have to be she thought. The character can then actually say, this reminds me of, and don't stretch it to 5 pages of the backstory, but just in a sentence or two, summarize what that memory is. Another very useful way of introducing backstories is purely by setting. So if I recently worked on a novel where the character's background was introducing by a detective walking into her home, and just observing a few objects, and by the choice of the objects that he sees in that home, you immediately know who this woman is, just by the collection of things that she has, the kind of teapot that she uses, the way she serves him. It was beautifully done, just by sketching a few objects and placing that woman in her home. And you knew what her backstory was just from that: a photograph, a teapot, the kind of furniture that she had, So yeah, again, returning to those tools, what is available and how can I use them in order to escape overdoing a technique? So you don't want and then she thought about this, and this reminded her of that.
Okay, I'm going to come in here as well. The backstory needs to be implied often in a short story. And I'm just linking it to that lovely image of this woman coming into the home, finding these items that you were talking about, and how the setting in actual fact can tell us so much about a character. So I just want to bring another example to the mix. Let's say your character is a homeless man. Just due to the fact that he lives under a bridge and sleeps on cardboard may be enough to actually inform his character. We don't need to actually know how he became homeless. Maybe his wife left him. Maybe he took drugs. Maybe he lost everything in COVID. If it's pertinent to the story, you can always find a way to build it in, for example. But we actually don't need all of that information, because backstory can take pages and pages. 3,000 words is a short space of time. So if you're going to devote too much of that to backstory, you're losing the opportunity to move your story forward. So in the case of the homeless man, we don't need to know anything about his backstory. It's implied because he is homeless. And just to add in as well, that showing a character's thoughts gives us insight into that character. For example, let's say a teenage girl could be scolded by her mother, and she replies, "Yes, Mom, I won't stay out after midnight again." But in the very next line, if this is, let's say, a story from the first person point of view, she could be thinking in her head, "That's what I'm saying to you, Mom. But in fact, I've already made a plan to meet my friends at the local park tonight, and I'm sneaking out. As soon as you close the door, I'm gone." So there are interesting ways to use dialogue as well as interior thoughts of characters, which also show who the character is, but also can move the story along. And what I mean by moving the story along is it can be used, those thoughts, those interior thoughts can be used in actual fact to show action. So just bear that in mind as well. Yeah, the last question from, I think it was from the same, from, was it Marie? Yeah,
Marie,
yeah. What other strategies are there to sketch in stuff about a character's past life, etc.? So, Karina, you did talk about some of them: memories, flashbacks, thoughts, strategies, looking in the mirror, which can trigger thoughts, the kind of house they live in or shack, or and just bear in mind as well that you, the writer, might know the entire backstory, but you don't need to share all of that with your reader. So yeah, when it comes to sketching in stuff about a character's past life, you really need to ask yourself, how much of their past life do you need to put in? Because you don't want to bog the story down. But sometimes we need that. So any kind of creative way of doing it, opening a drawer, unpacking a drawer, going to the shop, deciding what items to buy on the shelves. A homeless man, for example, might go to ShopRite and only buy baked beans and bread, whereas a more wealthy protagonist might fill a trolley full of items from Woolworths. So simply by revealing those actions of the characters, you are also showing us what's happened in their past life. You're showing us what social strata they come from, how they've lived their life up until that point. So there are lots of kind of sneaky ways of building in that material. Karina, over to you.
Before we go on with the questions, I just don't want to miss this one that is in the chat section.
Okay.
Must the competition entry be grammatically perfect? Also, is the rule of no more than 250 words be strictly adhered to? So I don't know about the rule of 250 words.
Yeah, okay, I think I'll come in there.
Yeah.
All About Writing runs a flash fiction competition. I think it's a monthly flash fiction competition of 250 words. And yes, that does need to be strictly adhered to, because that's what flash fiction is. I'm sure if it's 253 words or 54 words, it's not going to matter. But yes, you need to stay within that parameter. And flash fiction is almost, in a sense, a mini story. It's incredible how much information, how you can move a story along within those words. But for our competition, Fluid, the freedom to be, we are looking for between 3,000 and 5,000 words for our story. So for, who was it, Veronica, just go back to the All About Writing site and look for their flash fiction competitions. And in fact, it's great practice for everybody. And All About Writing runs fantastic courses. And if you win one of these competitions, they will offer you a course or some kind of mentorship, or, I don't actually know what what the prize is in a sense, but yeah, it's really, really helpful to do that.
There
So,
is also a wonderful UK-based magazine called Flash, and they allow submissions from all over the world, and I think their limit is 360 words. So it's something, you know, if you want to practice, it's a wonderful way. Then if you have stories that are that short, of maybe submitting to a magazine like that, Flash. And the first part of your question, must the competition entry be grammatically perfect? Of course not. I mean, you can just hear from my accent, you know, English is my third language, and I'm looking for story, I'm looking for imagination, creativity, and that's what editors are for. Of course, you don't want to write in a manner that is, how shall I say, disrespectful to language. You know, we are practitioners of language, and we want to honor the language that we write in. So of course, you know, it is wonderful to strive towards some kind of personal perfection, but in our case, I don't think that a few grammar mistakes are ever going to disqualify a story. I mean, we even the most brilliant writers make them. So
absolutely. And just to say what we really are looking for, and I think any reader is looking for this, and just think yourselves of your own reading and what excites you about a story or a book when you pick it up. Is it that in the first couple of paragraphs you think, phew, I really like this character, I can relate to this character? Or is it something about the voice of the character, or the voice of the storytelling, or the style? So that is really what we're looking for, something that grabs us. And you know, you'll actually find that something that grabs us or grabs you is going to universally grab many people, or, and I don't mean everybody in the reading world, but there will be an audience. Many people will respond to that. So just bear in mind your own reactions when you read, and try and be excited about your own writing. Yeah, I finally kind of, after a long time in writing, understood how writing needs to get you on a gut level. And that's the same for your own writing. Is when you, and what I mean by that is when you're writing, you'll write a sentence or you'll come up with an idea, and somewhere inside of you, you'll have that aha moment, and you'll think, yes, ooh, I really like that twist. That feels right. Your whole body just kind of dances about in your chair. And sometimes you're writing and you think, oh God, this is a little bit drab. And it might in fact be, because that's how you're responding to your writing. But we often have to write those drab bits in order to get to the stuff that makes us feel excited. So bear that in mind.
And like all the professionals say, you know, hardly anybody can get it out there in a perfect first draft. It's hardly ever happens. So writing is rewriting, and that's the bottom line.
Vanessa asks, I would like to know how to handle swearing in the story. One of my characters is very frustrated, an angry man. I think he would swear quite a bit in real life. Okay, I'll start off with this one. I started off my writing career as a crime writer, and I swore a lot in my texts. And I've come to realize that there are better ways of saying things. I think swearing has a place, but it also can be overdone. And let's actually think of reasons why this man might be angry. And then how can we show this man in his angriness in our text? So, for example, he can punch a hole through the door, or he can talk to a therapist. They can talk through his anger. Or he can rip up a letter he's just received. Perhaps he's received a summons from, you know, the city of Cape Town for electricity that he's never received. So there are different ways to show. And then we get back to this whole showing, not telling. So telling would be, he is an angry man, full stop. But showing would be, George received the letter in the post. He opened it. He saw the bill. He thought, oh, not again, another bill. And in this case, he might say, oh, fuck you, City of Cape Town. You know, fuck it, I haven't had more than 2 hours of electricity today, in which case swearing might be authentic. But if he's going to swear in every second sentence, then it actually gets quite tedious for the reader. And swearing can be overdone, just like repetitive words. We've got to watch out for being lazy. So I would suggest that you keep your swearing to a minimum and look at other ways to show how frustrated and angry this man is.
And the only case where I can imagine where it's completely justified is when you have a character with a background where it would be almost impossible for them to always speak very politely. You know, if your main character is a gangster, then he or she will probably use a language that is quite strong. And I also remember from Andre Brink's Devil's Valley. I remember Andre speaking about this novel. His main character there, Flip, he for a very long time, he didn't work as a character. He didn't come alive. And then one day, Andre imagined him speaking like one of his best friends, and that best friend was somebody who swore quite profusely. And suddenly Flip got that language of a friend, and then he came alive, because that was how one imagined him, or could imagine him much better than without the swearing. But it has to have a function, like Joanne said. I would never do it simply because you know, it's an easy way to express something. If there are more sophisticated ways of expressing anger, then please, by all means, you know, let's use our imaginations and let's not take the easy way out. But if it is it's an essential part of somebody's character, then yes. And I will, and then there is the other way around. I remember once meeting with a woman who was very, very sophisticated, extremely well educated. She spoke this beautiful English, and she was somebody that I could never imagine swearing. And then during our conversation, she used the word fuck only once in a very appropriate moment. And it was one of the most powerful expressions of her devastation and anger for what she was telling me, the story that she was telling me. So if you have a character like that, and then you use that swear word very wisely at a given point, it can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, Karina, I think that is so true. So one always has to go back to ask, who is my character? How would they dress? How would they speak? Is my character authentic? So, and I think just, you know, bearing that in mind, authenticity always brings us back to our character. And, you know, we've been talking about backstory. Yes, it would be great to know the color of our characters' eyes, the shape of their nose, what they look like in the minutest detail, how they behave, where they went to school. And in a sense, if we have got that backstory in our minds, it allows us to build more authentic characters. But what I'm saying is you can't include all of that backstory in your short story. There just isn't the space all the time. But if you build an authentic character, all of those things will form almost a shadow, and your character will then be authentic. So when it comes to using that word fuck, it will come at the right time, at the right moment. Okay, Karina, would you like to start off with Sifo's question?
Sifo asks, does there have to be a definitive ending? And that is, what about experimental writing? And can one write a short story in chapters? So about the definitive ending, of course not. You know, not everything needs to be resolved within the time span of the story. We have what is called a slice of life story, where we enter somebody's or a character's life in a given moment, and then we leave it. And between that beginning and the end, something happens that the storyteller wants to share with us. But then there is this openness about what went on before and after. And the beauty of stories like that is that they engage our imaginations as readers. So we are made to work quite hard to imagine, but what led up to that moment where the story begins, and then what possibly can happen afterwards. And I think that when a story, that kind of slice of life story, is well realized, what happens is what I mentioned 2 weeks ago, is where you can, in that slice, tell about circumstances or about a character in such a vivid and layered way that the reader will leave with a sense of maybe a little bit of disappointment that, oh, but now I don't have that definitive ending, that the narrator is depriving me of telling me what happens. But it's so vividly described that up to that point, you can actually imagine beyond. And the beauty of such stories is that they engage us, and we want to imagine what is possible. So I would definitely not aim for it. And experimenting in fiction is what makes our lives exciting. So if you have that kind of story to tell, where you want to leave your reader wanting and having to imagine, absolutely go for it. Some of the best stories are like that.
And I'll just say something about writing in chapters. Fred Kumalo's A Coat of Many Colors is a collection of about 20 short stories in which he writes from every single point of view, from the point of view of an Afrikaans woman, a Black boy child, I think he puts himself in this in all sorts of bodies, different bodies. And what I found fascinating is that many of these stories are also written in chapters, in short chapters. And I really enjoy reading that form. It is, in a sense, it helps the story to move. And in some cases, those different chapters are even written or are even written from the points of view of different characters. So we're not saying that if you choose one character, you've got to stick with that character for your entire short story. If you have different characters with different voices and you feel that there's a way to bring them in, if you want to separate your text with chapters, giving the action a break, then why not? Let's see what happens. It can be fun and it can be exciting. So
yeah,
yes.
There's one other type of story that I would like to mention, which is one of my absolute favorites. I love those stories when I encounter them, is the stories where the last line of the story completely throws it on its head, where you think that for the last 4 pages you think that you were reading one thing, and then the last line of the story tells you, oh, hang on, I was actually reading something completely different. And so there is not, in the sense, a definitive ending, but an ending that makes you reconsider everything that you've read until then. And there are plenty of examples. The short story that introduced me to South African writing was one of those, and it's called the moment before the gun went off, and it's a Nadine Gordimer short story. And it's a story about a farmer who accidentally, his gun goes off while he is driving in his bakkie, and the bullet kills one of the laborers on the farm. And throughout the story, there are all the political, socio-political implications of what that situation means in a South African context. And then there is also the grieving mother of the laborer, and then you have a funeral scene, and only in the last line of the story you find out that it wasn't only that this was a relationship between a farmer and one of his laborers. You find out that the farmer was this young man's father. And you only find that out in the last line. And it's a shocking revelation, and of course also speaks to the socio-political reality of the time that the story represents. So yeah, and I will never forget reading it. And it's the story that introduced me to South African literature.
That sounds like an incredibly powerful story. I'm going to go and find that one to read. Okay, Karen asks, I'd like to ask about the balance between immersive, implicit, and literal reflective writing. Is there a balance to be achieved in writing a short story? By using the literal reflective telling, do we break the flow of the show, don't tell experience? We spoke in our last seminar or our webinar quite a lot about show, don't tell, because that is what we'd actively like to encourage writers to work with, to create scenes as opposed to storytelling. However, the balance, there's always going to be a balance between showing and then what we call exposition. Well, here I am saying always, not always, but if you decide that that your story needs some explanation, some exposition, then it's absolutely fine to include that. We are not saying that your entire story must be based on show, don't tell. For example, if you need to impart some information and it could be seen as telling, that's absolutely fine if it works in the story. So, in some cases, in fact, there is a lot of telling. And I'm actually thinking about the African storytelling tradition, the oral storytelling tradition, which could also be described as telling. I mean, if you can imagine, people are telling stories. They're not creating scenes and creating dialogue. They're telling a story. So, of course, there is space for that. But even when we tell a story, we've got to be very careful about the pace we set and the words we use in order to keep the reader interested in following that story. So I would say that most writing is actually going to be a combination of both. It's going to be a combination of scenes, which is show, don't tell, and a combination of exposition. And the way I tend to look at it is the scenes are like beads on a necklace. The exposition is the string that binds them together. So the beads are the immersive scenes, those scenes where the writer is actually in the very life of the storyteller themselves. Those scenes are immediate. They contain detail, they contain dialogue. But then the storyteller removes themselves from the scene, needs to perhaps explain something or do a bit of telling. That might be considered that little bit of string that separates that one bead from the next bead. So again, it's just how are you going to tell your story? How are you going to put it all together? But there is place for both. So if you do find yourself telling, don't beat yourself up over it. Maybe that's what your story needs. So yeah, Karina, can you add something to it?
No, not really. I think that's exactly
Yeah.
finding the right balance and
Finding the right balance. Yeah.
No, and one has to be honest with oneself. You will feel sometimes that this is just not working, and when it's not working for you, it's probably not going to work for the reader. So be honest and stick to it and experiment and see whether you can make it work for yourself, or ask a dear friend, can you please read this passage and tell me, it's not working for me, how can I improve? Before we go to the next question, I want to just read out Tariq's question here. How loosely or not can the theme be used in the fluid competition? And because it relates to the last question. So the last question that we have on our list from the ones that were sent in, Marie or Moira is asking, I just wanted to check on the topic. Am I correct in saying that as long as it's a good story connected to a sense of fluidity, flow, movement, it will meet the brief? For that is, it doesn't have to have an overtly political, gender identity, cultural connection. I'm thinking of Erica's free ride as an example, set in the rain, water flowing, and possibly blood a little later. If that developed into a story, would it be an acceptable meet the brief submission? One of the reasons I'm asking is because our writing group was discussing the topic and people worried that their stories might not meet the brief. What I think one of the most wonderful, sorry, I'm seeing now, introduction, is this, oh, sorry, something happened. I think the most important thing about the theme is that we will definitely not limit people's imaginations. You know, the more you can surprise your reader, I think the more exciting it becomes. And I remember when we were compiling the anthology, Joanne, that we did on hair, and there the writers really surprised us with the most wonderful inventive interpretations of the theme. They went places that we could have never imagined ourselves. So I think, you know, it can't be, if it can't be a story about, I don't know, about apples, you know, where you are just, you know, writing about the apple industry, and it has absolutely nothing whatsoever that's unconnected. And one will also know this. We have to be honest with ourselves. You know, I've also been tempted when there was a brief or somebody was saying, oh, you know, there is an anthology coming here, or there is a competition there. You know, we have a tendency occasionally to be lazy and to also look into the drawer of possibilities that never got anywhere. And you think, oh, if only I just, you know, I have this story and it didn't get anywhere, but if I wrote this theme into it, then maybe I can just pass it on. And that will probably not work. So we just, you know, you will know yourself whether you are interpreting the theme and whether it's leading you to an exciting imaginative space, or whether you are just trying to put a story that you want to write for a completely different reason, and you are just trying to squeeze the theme in, and it actually doesn't belong.
Thanks, Karina. I think that's pretty clear. And then what we're going to do now, which might help you to also consolidate ideas for a story, is we're going to start the writing part of the workshop. So does anyone need to stretch their legs or fetch themselves a glass of water or anything like that? Or
the loo.
I've got to leave for 15-20 minutes to pick somebody up, but I'm not going to turn my Zoom off. I'm going to leave it on if that's all right, and I'm going to go and come back.
Go and come back. Okay.
Is
and
that all
hopefully
right?
you'll be able to catch up. Absolutely.
If I miss it, I'll get it from the recording.
Yeah, okay. And you can try it out yourself. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the wonderful other Joanne writer, Joanne Harris, who usually speaks about writing that you know, these are the rules of writing, and you do this, 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 and this, and then you have a cup of tea.
Yes, exactly. And I'm looking at another interesting comment from Erica Bornman. Interesting question. With regards to the writing exercise, for me, the fluidity was going to come with the internal transformation the character undergoes as he watches his prey. But the rain and potential blood also works. Yeah, look, I mean, I think you need to trust your instinct and write a story that's exciting to you. I was thinking if I had to write a story, I think I would just be a woman lying on the grass and just allowing the wind to gently stroke her. And that would be my freedom to be, not to do anything, not to be anything. I don't know how that would develop into a story, but I think it's got to come from a point within yourself, and see where you can take it to. So fluidity is internal transformation in a sense. And it also depends on how you interpret fluidity for yourself. Okay, Moira says she has to go. She'll catch up on the writing exercise. Okay, so let's start with the writing exercise. What we'd like you to do is simply to write for 5 minutes. I'm going to put my little alarm clock on freedom, or the freedom to be. What does it mean to you? And just do free writing, which is allowing the thoughts to come into your head. This is not going to be judged. It's not going to be criticized. If someone wants to share one or two, we can do that. But it's simply to look at that theme of fluidity, or fluid, the freedom to be. Last time we asked writers to write about fluid. Now we want you to write about freedom. What does it mean to you? Perhaps you have already started a story. What does freedom to be mean to your character? Erica, maybe you can think about your character. What does freedom to be mean to that character? So I'm not going to say more about it. Just allow whatever comes into your mind, and you've got 5 minutes for that. So you'll hear alarm going in 5 minutes. Okay, we've got another minute or so. If anyone would like to share something that they've written in the comments section, maybe a line or two, please feel free to do so. And then we'll move on to the next part of the exercise. There we go. All right. Our time is up. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is I'll take you through the next little bit of the exercise, and then Karina, will you do the last bit?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now just for a couple of minutes, we're going to do something similar to what we did the last time. We're going to list 3 characters, and we thought this time give them each names. So it could be Helen, Daniel, and Rebecca, or whatever names you want to name your characters. And then 3 scenarios. Your character has had a sex change, or your character crosses a river, or your character goes on a train ride. So something for this exercise that implies freedom of some sort, maybe a journey of some sort, a transformation of some sort. So just for a few minutes, I think probably 3 minutes would be enough. Just write down the names of 3 characters and list 3 scenarios. Is everyone clear about that? Just things that can happen to your character. Okay, 3 minutes for that. Yeah, okay. I don't think that was a full 3 minutes, but I'm sure everyone's got 3 characters and 3 scenarios. So now what we'd like you to do is to place your character in that scenario. So Helen has a sex change. Rebecca gets on a train. I can't remember the other name of the character. Daniel crosses a river. So whether he does that in a boat or he swims across the river, that's up to you. But place your character in that scenario and use it almost as an opener for a scene. And we'll give you 5 minutes to get going. So your character is now in a setting which implies freedom or movement of some sort. A ride, a crossing, a change, a metamorphosis, whatever one of those 3 scenarios suits your fancy right now. And remember, this is just an exercise. It's not the be all and the end all of writing. So just have fun with it. And 5 minutes from now. Okay, we'll stop there. And so hopefully what has happened is you have written a scene which involves a character in some setting, and there's hopefully some sort of movement or some sort of change or a movement towards a metamorphosis. So now, Karina, are you going to introduce the third little bit?
Yeah. So now you have to bear in mind that your story has to have some kind of momentum. You want the reader to remain intrigued, fascinated. You want to engage them in such a way that, of course, they will continue reading. And so in this case, what we are hoping is that, you know, the freedom that you are now writing about, whatever you chose for your scenario, it will imply some kind of a change, of something new happening. The momentum that we are speaking about, there is some kind of a realization, new. We can call it a chapter in the story or in the life of the character or in the circumstances that you are describing. So for the next 5 minutes, we would like you to take the story that you have now, the text that you have written, and now place your character into one of those what-if situations. and continue from there. So in the examples that Joanne gave, you know, what happens if the train stops and your character gets off at a station, or maybe they don't get off where they were supposed to, or your transgender character meets somebody on a date, or the character who was swimming across the river gets there and possibly decides, you know, that there is danger and they need to get back, or something like that. So just what if now, imagine a new set of circumstances that will propel the story forward. And I think we also have 5 minutes for that, and then we will share.
I think what we're trying to do is, if you get stuck in a short story, because often people have a character, they have a setting, they put that character in a setting, but then they don't know what's going to come next. So just to solidify this, to always ask yourself, what happens next? Or what if my character did this or did that, or whatever. I mean, that's for you to do, to make those, and you can make them in lists as well. But okay, so the clock is going.
Yeah, Frankie just made a lovely comment here, like a crisis, for example. A crisis is a very good example of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes, done. I think what we're trying to show is this element of cause and effect, because a story is really a number of causes and effects. So your character goes on a date, let's say, it doesn't work. Now, what is your character going to do? Your character is going to go on Tinder. She goes on Tinder. What happens then? Does she decide it's not for her? Does she become overwhelmed? Or does she end up agreeing to be part of a threesome? So what I'm saying is you're always bringing your character to some sort of crossroads. Which choice will she make? What will happen if she does this or that? So I think what we're trying to help you with is just make you aware of how story develops. It doesn't have to be in your head precisely right from the start, although some stories are born that way. We have this idea and we write it down and it seems a perfectly coherent story. But quite often we have the beginnings of the story. We take our characters to a certain place and then we don't know what happens next. And that's when we ask the question, what happens next? Or what if my character did that? So always remember those questions, because it's really helpful when you often just get stuck or don't quite know where to go next. So, okay, what we are going to suggest is that you take these little stories, mini stories, I call them, and you actually at home write the next section. Give yourself 5 minutes. Ask yourself that very question. What is she going to do next? Or he? Or what conversation are they going to have now? And then see what happens. See what is revealed to you. Because I often find in writing that the stories come as one actually writes. The action, the character is often revealed through the writing. And then what we can do is go back and enlarge it or write into it or recreate it in some cases. So this is really just a taste of writing a little story now, and hopefully you've had a surprise to see what you actually can do without having intended or come to this workshop with these ideas in the first place. So we are now, Karina, going to share. Is that right? Great.
So. Yeah. So
yeah.
Who is going to be generous and brave enough to share what they've written? Okay.
Well,
Erica,
sorry.
maybe, we have something in the chat from Erica. Yeah. Erica, would you then please unmute yourself and maybe read it to us?
Great idea.
I'm sorry, I was that child at school who always put my hand up when the teacher asked. And like, I am continuing that trait. Sorry, guys. So the freedom to be. The freedom to be is the freedom not to be. Why do I need to stay here? Keep suffering. The lure of oblivion pulls me. I wake up not wanting to be here every day, but I cannot succumb, not yet. My anger fuels me. I have to ensure justice is meted out for Tembi, for Patrick, for me too, though I'm still here and I didn't suffer the way they did. I want to cease existing. I have no dependence. I made sure of that. I'm not dependable. He taught me that. I want the freedom to cease to exist, but that freedom comes at a cost. Only 3 people love me, but I know my erasure of self will wound them. There's no freedom in that.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly, like Fiona did. What I love about this beginning is that you mentioned here that it follows from the characters that you created during our last session, but even in itself, that there is an obvious situation. So there is somebody who is now contemplating, do I still want to live, or is it time to go? And yet there are all these unanswered questions and there is a purpose, but we actually don't understand what is the background. So I, as a reader, want to immediately know, but what led to this situation? And also, of course, I will continue reading to find out, is this going to be one of those stories where sadly the character decides to end own life, and is basically telling the story from beyond the grave, or in that unusual, way that we have the power of narrative and taking on a voice beyond the grave, or is there going to be a redemptive moment in the story where something will happen, where the justice that this character is longing for yeah, that needs to be meted out, is actually meted out, and the Tembi and Patrick get what they deserve in the context of the story that you are about to tell. And then maybe the 3 people who love the main character will be enough to allow them to stay and continue. So I think it's a wonderful opening, because it throws up so many questions, and one would want to read and find out what happens.
Thanks, Karina. I agree. I think often one thinks of the freedom to be as, a young person running through a field of daisies or whatever, or, lying on the lawn looking at clouds. But the freedom to be actually also brings to the mix the existential question of why are we here? The freedom to live, the freedom to end our own lives if we want. So it really implies existence and what we're here for. What I really liked about it was the way you read it. I could clearly sense a voice there. You were reading it in your speaking voice, yes, but that speaking voice and the written voice seemed so authentic to me, and it was very easy to listen to. It really took me right into the story. As Karina said, it introduced us to a number of characters. Who were they? Patrick, Tembi, the people that love you. So you didn't spell out who these people are, but you brought them subtly into the story, which piques our interest. We want to know.
And there's the mysterious he in the parentheses. So there's somebody who, still needs to be explored.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So a lovely first couple of paragraphs, and let's see where you go with that. Okay, you've added another couple here, Erica, because you are the child, like me and many, who often puts up their fingers first, their hands first. Shall we see if anyone else would like to read, or what do you think, Karina? Can we just stick with Erica's for the moment?
We've got Frankie and we've got Melissa now. So Frankie, if you could please unmute yourself and read your passage to us.
Okay, great. And then Erica, just to say, we love you. We know exactly what it's like to be, the child who puts up their hand every time. It's wonderful. Okay, so who's going next?
Hi, everybody. It's Frankie here from Windhoek. And Erica, I'm just like you. I always put up my hand first. You beat me to it. Okay, this isn't quite where I wanted to go, but I think it's sort of going, and I called it the circus performer. Elsa swung into the apex of the dome, reveling in the fluidity of flight as she reached the pinnacle. And then that something moment in time, rope returned to the safe hands of Rupert. Within the second, she released the rope and soared over the audience, catching a glimpse of the sun setting beyond. Rupert swung, sorry, I've moved it up. Rupert swung from the opposite side in a practice movement, his hands reaching out for Elsa as she stayed on course. Their fingers touched, and then in the blink of an eye, she soared past him into the spectators. ... You can do it. Try again. The tears were running down Elsa's cheeks as she forced her brain to concentrate. One fork, one pea, and the mouth. Her fork balanced on top of the pea, missing it by millimeters, and she slowly maneuvered it backwards and down towards the white plate, not place. plate, pushing it underneath. "It's on," she cried. "Now take it up to your mouth. That's it. Up, up, up. Movement. Concentrate. Nearly there. To the right. Up again. That's it. That's it. You did it." And then I've lost the last bit. The ward cheered as she ...
Okay. Wonderful. I mean, you've already got a sense of story there. What I find quite interesting is, you know, when we start to read it, we think it's a circus performer, which is a fluid sort of an action. Telsa is going to let go of the rope and be caught by the hands of Rupert, etc., etc. And I could just imagine that circus scene, that practiced movement. And then suddenly there's the switch. You can do it, try again. And we realize that, I mean, I take it that this is still Telsa, but it's a different time of life, or there's been an accident, something has happened, and one becomes very intrigued. So without actually telling us what's happened, without bringing in all that backstory, you've created a very intriguing start to a story, because we now want to know what has happened. Is this Telsa? What has happened to her? What time of life is it? She might now be an older woman. Perhaps something has happened to her. Perhaps she's had a stroke. I don't know. I'm just reading into this. Perhaps she did just have an accident. But what I am saying is that I sense the intrigue and I want to know more. And that is always the basis of a good short story or good writing, is to hook the reader so the reader thinks, ooh, okay, this is interesting. What happened?
The way I read it, and I think it would be amazing if you completely then once again upturned my expectations. But the way I read the ending of the first passage is that she flies past, so maybe he doesn't actually manage to hold on to her, and that it sometime has passed, and now her greatest challenge is to be able to eat. So with the way I imagine it, that she probably had the first scene ended in a terrible accident, and that she is now somehow struggling to get back just to normal, ordinary functioning, like being able to eat a pea and to put it on the end of a. So there is a different kind of balancing that goes on, just the fork and the pea.
100%, Karina. That's exactly where I think you picked it up. I thought I would be. I'm normally too on the nose, which it always says. You're right. She soared past him. She crashed into spectators. She was beaten. Her body was an accident. And the next bit is somebody that I know that fell off a horse. And the next is the recovery in the ward. And then my thinking was that was the crisis. And then the third is the fluidity of coming back into her later life as the joy of movement again, and she finds it again.
It's a beautiful interpretation of the theme of freedom, because in the first scene there is this incredible freedom of movement and something very daring, something that most of us would never experience. So the kind of life of wonder and freedom that a circus performer experiences. And then from the second scene, it's very clear that freedom has been completely and totally reduced to a minimum. And then I would want to know how then it continues.
I haven't thought that yet. Your idea from one of the others who said, can you write a short story in scenes, set this idea off as I started writing it. Thank you.
Yeah, it also reminded me of the question. Yeah, this is clearly like chapters, and I don't know, you would probably subvert our expectations again in the next scene. So thank you for that. It's a lovely. It's amazing what one can achieve in a few minutes, and this is great. Yeah.
I think it also speaks to the question of how much backstory should one put in, because you haven't provided a scene, and you may well later on depending how this develops. But you went straight from she soared past him into the spectators to you can do it, try again. So you haven't given us all of the information in between, which we can imagine, police, ambulances, people screaming, maybe someone else was injured. You could write an entire novel, kind of in the in-between section of those two passages. So what I'm trying to say is that often the reader brings their own imagination to the words that you write. So you needn't ever even mention the accident or paint the accident in any gory details. You can leave it to the reader to imagine that for themselves. So it's just a good example of, one of the questions was, how much backstory do I include? You don't have to include all the backstory. You just include the pertinent bits. And this is a great example of how to move the story along without bringing in pages and pages of what happened in between. Thank you for that. Okay,
Thank you very
who's
much.
next? Great.
Okay. So Melissa, would you please unmute yourself and read your passage?
Okay, so this is the second scene. The first scene was in the mother's point of view. It's in the context of postpartum depression. And so this is the second scene where someone is on the move and it's the father. Brody puts the baby in the pram. She doesn't wiggle. She gazes at him. Her eyes are like opaque ponds, unknowable fathoms. He hadn't expected this of fatherhood. His hands linger. He doesn't know how to put her down, how to let her go without dropping her. No one told him at antenatal, or was that one of the classes he missed? He finally secures the baby and starts to walk. His baby, Shanna's baby. He pushes the pram out of the apartment door. He moves away from the darkness toward the elevator. The baby kicks on the ride down. He supposes he'll have to name her now.
Thank you.
I love the last line of this because until then we can still kind of imagine, well, this is a new father and this is what he's doing. But the last line is amazing because it completely, comes unexpected and you think, but why? I mean, at this stage, everybody would expect that the father would have named the child already. So one would want to know, why is this the case?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a lovely little scene. I can just see Brody and the baby. What I am wondering is what is going to happen next, how this is going to fit in with fluidity, with the freedom to be. But I'm sure that will be, once you've written the full story. And also, this might not be a story on the theme. It might simply be what came to you now in the writing.
And I think that maybe the freedom to be in my mind is on with the mother. So maybe I put the wrong scene in.
Oh, the wrong scene. No, not at all.
Because I started, the beginning scene is with the mother, like away from the baby. And maybe the freedom to be within the constraints of postpartum depression. I think that's where I'm going.
Yeah, all right, because that is really interesting, because postpartum depression, mothers who suffer from postpartum depression often do feel trapped, and then they feel guilty because they're supposed to love this baby and all they want is their freedom. They can't breathe. Their whole life is now turned upside down. What are they going to do with that? So yeah, this might well be a story then that is told from two points of view. You could tell it from the mother's point of view, and you could tell it from Brody's point of view. So it could be written in different chapters, different voices, this kind of juxtaposition of a father who loves his baby and the mother who loves the baby, one would imagine, but also needs that freedom. And how does she cope with that?
And how does she find that freedom when she's so mentally constrained? the
Yeah.
fluidity of motherhood through those difficulties. That's
Yeah.
I'm not sure that this would be intended, obviously, because it's only the beginning. But what I read into it as well is that he's obviously very new to this situation, and it's not what he expected. So, and the last line also implies that there are very strange circumstances around the birth of this baby, but also that it is because I was thinking, how does the freedom to be fit into this particular passage? It is, of course, his way of being in the world will change. So his freedom by fatherhood will also now be limited, or perhaps not. Maybe that's the reason why there is no connection to the baby yet.
Yes, because he's got too much so-called freedom, and he needs to realign his freedom. I don't know. Let's see.
Let's see. That's a very interesting phrase, let's see, because the story will take you, the more you write, the more will be unfolded and unraveled as you get into their characters and as you explore their motivation.
Maybe we'll delete him and stick
Boitumelo.
with the mum.
Sorry?
I said maybe we'll delete him and stick with the mum.
Yes, we're right. And that does actually happen when one is writing short stories. You start with one character and then you find out, oh, but the other character is actually much more interesting. And that is the character that I really want to write about. So just because you start off with two characters doesn't mean you've got to follow through with two characters. But maybe the baby will have a voice. Who knows? One of my favorite novels, it's a novella actually written by Bernice Rubens, is about a baby in the womb, and he is the narrator. And he does crazy things. He decides, I'll just put it in a nutshell. He doesn't want to be born because he hears what's going on in the world. So he extends his little hand out of his mother's vagina and he grabs a notebook and pen and he starts to write down all his objections to being born. And there are other things that happen as well. He grabs a violin too and plays beautiful music. But that is the narrator, this unborn baby. So never dismiss any character that comes to you. Okay, Boitumelo Mofokeng has a question which I think we need to address. Does text story have to carry the full words of the theme, fluid, the right to be, or the freedom to be? If not, can judges see it in the story? Will it not be subjective for the judges? You don't need to actually have the words fluid, the freedom to be, or the right to be in the story at all, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Karina might have a different view, but I don't think so. But it is that emotional authenticity that we're looking for. So to use fluid as a starting point, freedom to be or not to be, it is really almost like a prompt to get you thinking about fluidity, freedom, what it means to you, the right to be free. It's interesting for me that you've written those words, the right to be, not the freedom to be. So, look into that. What does that mean? The right to be for you. Can the judges see it in the story? Will it not be subjective for the judges? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but maybe Karina, you can pick up and say something. But yeah, I think it's a very loose theme. As Karina said, you can't now go and write a story about, the weather well, I suppose you could. The weather is fluid. Apples, let's stick to that. But, whatever fluidity means for you, because we've had such interesting responses. Someone said it was the dunes, the wind over the dunes. For Melissa, it is freedom to be a mother or not to be. I mean, we've got Erica's suicide, freedom to live or not. So there are many different interpretations. Yeah, Karina, can you add to that?
No, I think almost I would never want to limit writer's imagination, and sometimes maybe even using the words that are in the brief actually limits your story in a strange way, or it reduces your story because it can then mean, well, I've used the words now, so my job is done. So I think thinking beyond them and also looking into the kind of connotations that one has, like Joanne mentioned, the right to be is quite an interesting connotation in this context. And yeah, I think, you know, that is the most exciting thing about writing, that you really never know what is going to be possible and what you will find yourself exciting in a theme. I'm just remembering, Joanne, because you posted a picture of me holding our anthology Hair during that radio interview where we were taking callers from the radio listeners' questions. And I will never forget how somebody phoned in and said, when I read your book, and the book is called Hair, will I know how to make a wig? And you know, we thought, well, this is quite an unusual question, and no, there is no manual how to make a wig in this collection of stories, but there was a story featuring a wig. And it was quite a wonderful, flamboyant story. And I remember the wig was purple. So I think that everybody, and that listener who phoned in, had a completely different expectation from the theme. And then we imagined, and I think that's the beauty of these explorations. So if your imagination takes you way beyond those words, fluid, freedom to be, but still there is a obvious route that you took in order to get to your idea, and you can make the reader see that there is actually a connection, it will be the more fascinating for the judges to read.
Mm. And I might also come in here with a very different view. I've just read a book called The Sweetness of Life, and every single second sentence starts off with the sweetness of life, and then some kind of memory comes back to this person. So, you know, you can also use it as a device, the freedom to be, or fluid means to me, blah, blah, blah. But this is not nonfiction, and it is not flash fiction, and it is not simply writing out a list of gratitude phrases or anything like that. You have got to develop some sort of story, which means that the characters have got to develop. Something's got to happen. And I would say that in short story writing, that's what it boils down to. Something has to happen. And it doesn't mean something spectacular, but from the beginning of that story to the end of that story, even if the whole story is the woman lying on the grass looking at the clouds, she must see some shape in the clouds that changes her in some minuscule way. And the story might end with her still lying on the grass in the clouds, looking at the clouds. But I think what I'm trying to say is a short story must progress. There's got to be some shape to it. And there has got to be, we were talking earlier about definitive endings. It doesn't have to be a definitive ending, but there must be progression. It's not just phrases. So, yeah, sorry, I hope that wasn't confusing, but
I'm just looking that Julia just wrote to us and said, I have to go now, but it has been so helpful. Thank you. And I just looked at the time and I see that people are leaving. So I think we have run out of time, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Wonderful to have you. And we look forward to receiving your stories. Good luck and happy writing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you to especially All About Writing. It was amazing.
Yes, thank you, All About Writing. It's been wonderful. Yeah. Great. Bye. And Karina, you and I and Emma, we're just going to stay connected for a few minutes.